Archaeology. It's the evolution of the portable shortwave radio, and I kind of put this all together last night in lieu of, because Mark couldn't make it, so you have to bear with me here. And I don't know if you ever saw the program, The American Pickers, on the History Channel. You watch that? They go around looking for old stuff and they put it in their store, and their store is called Antique Archaeology. Well, this is radio archaeology here. How is this related to ham radio? Well, a lot of us started as shortwave listeners before we got into ham radio, and there were hams involved in the development of all these radios. And the rise and fall of the portable radio kind of parallels the rise and fall of the electronics industry in the United States. And if you look at the history of these radios, it shows the radio history, the development of technology, and shows where we are today. The story starts with Ralph Matthews, who was a ham, 9ZN, that's 9 Zulu November. And in 1912, he started in ham radio. He built a spark transmitter, he had receivers, he had a very well-regarded station. And he started building parts to sell, radios to sell. And he partnered with Carl Hassel, and together they started Chicago Radio Labs. And they made one radio a day on their kitchen table. Matthews was known in ham radio in the early days. If you read older ARRL stuff, he's mentioned every now and then for using his station for transatlantic listening tests, radio relays, and so forth. The radios they sold, they called them Zenith after the 9ZN call sign. So that's where that came from. Eugene McDonald became interested in radio. He was a businessman. He bought and sold a couple of businesses. He had a pile of money, and he thought it would be a good business investment. Everybody wanted radios. They were in short supply, and they sold for a lot of money, so he saw the profit potential there. He allied with Hassel and Carl Hassel and Matthews, and they formed the Zenith Radio Corporation in 1923. We skip ahead to about 1939. RCA in Sylvania developed 1.5 volt tubes, and they used 1.5 volts on the filament, and you could actually power them with flashlight batteries. And they needed 90 volts on the plate, and you could put together 60 AA cells in series, and then you'd end up with 90 volts. Well, it came out of there last night.
Well, but they got pretty heavy, didn't they?
Well, what's that?
I bet they got pretty heavy with that many batteries.
Yes, and right here is a 90 volt pack in the bottom, weighs about 9 or 10 pounds. And it also has a series of D batteries in to power the filaments. So they would hook together the filaments in series. So if you had 6 tubes, you'd need 9 volts, and so you'd get 9 volts out of a series of D batteries. A whole bunch of manufacturers started making these. They called them suitcase portables because they looked like a suitcase, and the material on this case is the exact same stuff that they used in suitcases back in that day. They also called these three-way portables. You could plug this into 110 volts or in the wall, or 110 volts DC, and then it could also use the battery, so 3 different ways. Some of the ships that you would go on had DC coming out of the socket, and there were some cities in the US that had DC power coming out of their electrical sockets, so you could use them either way. If you plugged it into DC, there was a 50% chance the radio would turn on, you'd have to unplug it, turn the plug around, and put it back in, so being it's plus and minus. So, and you didn't know until you plugged it in. Well, McDonald had a yacht that he lived on in Chicago. He was the head of Zenith, and he liked to go up to Canada and fishing up in Canada, and he couldn't pick up any radio stations up there during the daytime, and it was even a little hard to pick them up at night. And he brought these radios along, and what Zenith advertised here was this was the world's best portable radio. It was guaranteed to play where others fail, or your money back. It plays in planes, trains, ships, and automobiles. And the reason it does that is that they came up with this, you know, if you're in a train that's metal, you can't pick up any stations because of the metal car. So they came up with this antenna with suction cups, and you'd stick it on the window, and then it would pick up stations. They had kind of a fanciful name for it. They called it the wave magnet. And so on this magnet, you see these lightning bolts coming out of the end. You aim it at the station, and it would draw the station in. So it's kind of hokey, but it worked.
Basically a loop antenna?
Yes, yes. Some of them had ferrite in, but this one I believe is just a loop antenna. Well, anyway, McDonald wanted to listen to shortwave, and so he asked his engineers to come up with a portable radio that had shortwave in. And Gus Gustafson was the head engineer of Zenith. He was also a ham radio guy, so he knew shortwave and he knew ham radio. And so he wound some coils. He took one of these off the production line, brought it to the lab, and came up with a band switch. And then you could pick up shortwave. McDonald was pretty fussy. They sent 20 different prototypes to him. Over the period of a couple of years, he rejected them all. And eventually the last one he liked. He did try it out. I don't know if you ever looked at radios from the 1940s. They had like one continuous or a couple continuous bands. So the shortwave bands are all little spaces on the dial, like a half inch. And so you try and tune them, there could be 10 stations in that half inch. Well, Gustafson came up with a plan where you electrically you could spread out that half inch. And so he came up with bands that were about 5 or 6 inches long. And then that way you could spread out the stations. You could also look, you had it marked in frequency, so you could look up where the station should be and then find it. So that was quite successful. I'll show you the front of this. Has this cover. The covers come off. A lot of times people lost them. You find these without covers. And they tried to make it a little bit fancy. They stitched a sailboat into the grill cloth here, trying to dress it up a little bit. They all had schemes. If you turn the radio on, this little red flag appears, which means that you're running down your batteries. So it's a reminder to turn the radio off then when you leave the room, so you don't run your batteries out.
That one work?
No. It's awaiting restoration. Some of these do work. I have fixed them. So then the radio they came up with, they called it the Zenith Transoceanic, and this one is from 1941. And it's missing the glass over the dial. It's in rough shape, but these are hard to find. You can see on here it's got push buttons for the different bands, and then alongside it tells you that this band is good in the evening, this one's good mid-afternoon, afternoon, and so forth. So it kind of guides you. And then all the international shortwave bands are spread out across the whole dial here. It's got about 6 bands on it. The shortwave bands are like the 49 meter band, 31 meter band, 25 meter band, 19 meter band, and so forth. They're interspersed in between the ham bands. This radio, when it came out, they charged $75 for it. And if you work it out, that's $980 in today's money.
Whoa.
So, I don't know if you'd pay $980 for this, but I'll sell it.
If you could find one of those radios today, what would you have to pay for it?
Oh, they kind of go for around 100. You know, I bought them as cheap as 10. You know, sometimes 100. But this one goes for more because it's hard to find.
Where are you finding them at?
They follow me home.
I say,
Flea markets, sometimes antique shops. That's the worst place to buy them. They want twice as much for them. But,
I would think estate sales might be a good source also.
that too, yeah, that too. It has a chart on here to tell you different stations, U.S. shortwave stations, where to find them, what time to dial in. And then in the back, this one's really dirty inside. I have to apologize for that. It's got a whip antenna that comes out. It's like 4 feet long for shortwave. And then it's also got the the wave magnet with the lightning bolts on the end. This was a shortwave antenna in here. I'm not sure if it's a ferrite rod or just a loop. And it also has the suction cups to put it on the window. You can take them apart in order to get back together. If you look at it carefully, it's, you know, it's a little bit crudely built. You know, they could have made them better, but I guess it was the first one. Shortwave is still relevant in modern times. There's some areas of the world that have no radio stations, or it's hard to find. There's no internet service, so like in Africa, people still listen to shortwave radio. We were down in Ecuador, South America, right before the Gulf War was going to start, the first one. And some in our group were worried about getting back. They thought maybe that they would cancel flights if the war started and we wouldn't be able to get home. I had brought along a little Toshiba portable radio, and we sat around in the evening outside out by a table, and there was a group of us that would listen to it, listen to the BBC, the Voice of America, and see what the world news was. There were 30,000 of these made, and they started in December of 41. And of course, you know what happened then. It was Pearl Harbor. And so by April of the next year, they had to stop making them because they needed to turn over to war production. After the war, they came out with this one. There was 100,000 unfulfilled orders for this radio. So then they improved it and came up with this one, the 8G605, 1946, and dressed it up a little bit, made it a little fancier. It still has the buttons which tell you what time of day to tune. Here's the shortwave antenna that pops out. And these are about 4 or 5 feet long. This is the antenna for the AM dial. The hinges are metal, and it conducts, up to this antenna here. And you would pop this off, and again, they have the wave magnet. There's a cord in the back you hook up to this. There's also a couple of suction cups, and you stick it on the window of your train car that you're in.
Or your Duesenberg.
Yeah, right.
Question, Mitch. On the first one that you had there, the, just a straight AM radio?
Right.
Or medium wave?
Right.
That looks very familiar to like a radio that my mom had when I was before going to kindergarten. How long did they make that radio?
You know, Zenith made, there must have been 10 different models of small radios
Okay.
like that, you know. And this was the better one of the, you know, the AM portable radios, but they had smaller ones.
Okay. I just wonder how far back in history my dad had to go before he could find one that he could afford to buy my mom.
Oh, you know, they still made something similar in the 50s because somebody gave me a radio when I was a kid that was from the late 50s.
Okay,
That was in a
this would've
suitcase
been the
like that.
50s.
Yeah, so, yeah, I have an Emerson that's like that. Yeah, many different brands. I often thought if you brought this on a train, you'd have to buy an extra seat just to sit, you know, put it on, and then put this up on the window so you could listen to the radio.
Now, is that radio functional?
No. In fact, I usually don't plug them in. I go through them and change stuff before I plug them in, because you could plug them in.
I got a 40-ish Zenith that's over my sister's house, and I got a very early AM FM Zenith radio that's circa 48. And it works.
Is it portable?
No, it's a
Oh, yeah.
desktop.
This one, it's got the suction cups here. It also has the form of the wave magnet and the place for the battery underneath here. And let's see. Are you familiar with Loctite tubes? On the base here, it's got a catch, and then it catches into the tube socket. So you can take the radio and turn it upside down and shake it, and the tubes won't come out. They made them for the military, and these are 1-volt tubes. After about 30 years, the electrolytic capacitors give up in them, and so they need to be replaced. I had this one running. I used to use it, go out on the deck and listen to it, and I tried it here a few months ago. Oh, sure. I tried it a few months ago, and it doesn't work, so I gotta,
In the backside.
oh, the backside's.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
Thanks.
Oh, this one sold for $125, and that's $1,300 in today's money.
Wow.
Any takers, I'll sell it. You can sometimes find these about 40, 50 bucks, you know, unworking. There was a couple of models after that I didn't bring. They look really similar to that. I didn't want to go into, you know, great detail, bore everybody. Then they came out with the 600 series, and for $25 more, you could order it in a leather covering. And this one I think looks pretty elegant with the colors. It has the instruction book here. It also has a time chart. There's like a little dial here. You can put in your local time and find the time all around the world here. And then there's
What year would that be from?
54 to 62. Now, speaking of this book, I had this radio for quite a while before I found out that this opened up. And there's a book in here of instructions, tells where on the band where you find radio, you know, what stations and so forth. So it was kind of a clever little thing. This has these 4 switches here, and so it has 16 different possible combinations, and that's to set the tone of the speaker. You know, so you can set it for music, voice, and so forth. This one has the battery pack, that 9 or 10 pound pack, 90 volts and 1.5 volts. And it actually came with the original operating guide. When you'd look at them in the store, they had an antenna tag that would hang on them and tell the features. It's got a schematic in there and how to run it and other radio stations.
Question,
Yes.
between 1938 and this one right here, they both use 1 volt tubes. Was there any difference between the tubes they put in this one and that one? Are they the same, are they improved, or what?
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. Now you'll notice these are miniature tubes. They're 7-pin tubes. So these are a lot smaller. These were developed right around World War II. I'm not sure why they didn't use them in these, but yeah, these are 7-volt tubes. This one you can plug into the wall. It's got a reel here that the cord goes in and out. It's kind of a nice little feature. Then when you're in a train or on a ship, you pop this out. And again, here's the wave magnet. And I believe it's a ferrite rod in this one. And then say you're on a sailboat and you want a direction find out where you're at, you can tune in a station and you take the wave magnet, set it on the handle, and then you can rotate it for the best signal, and then so you can locate where you're at. Kind of like finding the rabbit, you know, for ham radio.
We'll look for you Sunday.
Yes, I'll bring it along. Yeah, this one seems like it was hardly used. A lot of people would buy these and they never took them out on a picnic or camping. They just left them at home and in living room
It's
in a
very,
day.
it looks to be in very pristine shape.
Yeah, this one is.
And you say that one works?
It did, until a few months ago. So I think it's a capacitor that went out. Sylvania made a tube called the 1L6 for this radio, and they're only found in some Zenith portables, and they're really hard to find. If you find one, they want $50 for that tube or more, you know, so you hate to burn one out. This one was the very last portable tube radio made in the United States. They went up till 1962, and nobody else was making tube portable radios then. And Zenith quit. Transistors came out in the late 40s. They were invented. Zenith was trying to stay ahead of technology, so they wanted to put them in their radios. Eugene McDonald bought a German camera, a Leica, and it had a brushed chrome finish on it. It also had black trim. And he told the engineers he wanted a radio that looked like his camera. So they came up with this. This is a very heavy steel case, heavy chrome on it, and it's all transistors. And to power this one, you need 9 D cells. This one is covered in genuine leather, the very first ones. And it came with the instruction book and the tag that hangs on the antenna. And to listen to, well, and again, on the top here, this black part is called the wave magnet. That's the AM antenna. And then when you want to listen to shortwave, you flip up the handle. Then you've got this.
All right.
There we go.
A lot of people have broken these. When it's full of batteries and you carry this around, this handle sometimes breaks. So it's kind of a weak point in the radio. It's hard to find one unbroken. And they had a plastic case. You put the 9 D cells in. 8 of them powered the radio, and 1 of them powered the dial light. The disadvantage, though, you open this up and all these fragile coils are exposed. If you bump them, you can break wires and wreck them. So it wasn't, you know, the perfect system. This one also has the little portable wave magnet that you, with the suction cups, you put on the window also. Then you plug it in where the antenna is supposed to go here. Those seem to be missing in most of them that you find. And there's a little place in here to put the earphone, the headphones. A lot of people left the batteries in them, and the batteries would corrode, and it would corrode the inside, and it would even corrode the electronics.
Yeah.
This one is unique because all the transistors plug into little sockets, just like tubes. Zenith thought that they didn't know how long transistors would last, so they thought you'd have to replace them, so they put them in little sockets, so they all unplug. And this one's actually was made in 1957. It's a 58 model. And there are date codes inside, like on the speaker and on the tuning capacitor. So this radio was actually made in the very first weeks of production. So it's a little bit unusual. It was kind of a nice find. I didn't know that until I researched it, but it was one of the earliest ones out there. It has this unique rotating dial, and you turn this handle, and each band that you want to listen to comes into view here. And so it's got all the shortwave bands spread out on it. And again, it has the time zone chart and the little slide rule for figuring out what time zone you're in, or the time in the zones. And in the little compartment here, it's got the book of instructions, where to find Great Lakes weather, and so forth. They had a fair reputation for being rugged. People would write letters to Zenith telling about what happened to their radios, and Zenith would publish it. You see pictures of people on a camel carrying one of these. You know, Arabs in the desert with a radio like that. Military men had them, and like a platoon would get together, they'd all pool their money and buy one of these. It was pretty expensive for one person to buy one, but throughout World War II, they used a lot of these and listened to them. By 1963, the radio was getting a little bit obsolete. They were getting lighter and smaller, and this one didn't have FM. And by that time, McDonald had died in 1958, and so he wasn't around to push for his favorite radio. And so the engineers added FM to this one, and in order to do it, they had to make the back bulge out. They put another chassis in there upside down. And, see, it's got an upside down chassis in there for the FM section. The transistors plug in underneath. This one's missing its battery case, and you can see there's some corrosion on the electronics there. But this one still works. It doesn't have batteries in it. And they still had the shortwave antenna, and you'd put it in this position, draw it out about halfway for FM stations. They said that worked the best. They still made them by hand wiring. The chassis is very heavy steel. It was all hand soldered, and so it was very it took a lot of labor to make these, so it made them expensive, and it was hard to compete that way. In 1969, they decided to improve it and came up with this one. And this one doesn't, if you open it up to get at the batteries, they can't corrode and get into the electronics. There's a separate battery chamber in here. The antenna is no longer part of the handle, so it's not as fragile for the short wave. And this slides in, you can get it out of the way. It's got the time zone chart. There's a little strip here with the numbers on. You can set the time in your zone, and then you can look up in any time zone and see what time it is. So it's quite a handy little device. This has more bands. It's got a VHF band. You can listen to the National Weather Service on it. It's got an FM band. And when you're on your yacht, you can open up this little thing here, and when you turn this light lights up so you can look at your charts and such. And it also lights up the dial here. They also use these for direction finding. You'd rotate the radio and look for a strongest station or the null. Then they had a compass rose here so you could get the heading. This one also has a BFO on it, and RF gain. And then it's got selectivity. You can make it slice down the signal, and so you can actually listen to CW and single sideband on this radio. I still use this when I got it in my den at home. I listen to the National Weather Service on it, sometimes FM. And I have one similar to this at work that I also listen to sometimes. So.
What vintage is that?
This is 1969, and they only made these up until about 78, 9 or so. There's a couple different versions. Actually, each one of these, there's several different versions of them. There's 3 different versions of this. I've got the different ones, but they all look alike, so I didn't bring them all. This, it's also very heavy. It's got a very thick, heavy steel box inside, heavy steel chassis. This was still hand-wired, and the competing Japanese companies all made them cheaper, printed circuit boards. So this was becoming obsolete, and Zenith could no longer compete in price with the Japanese radios. So they came out with this one in about 1979. And it's a little bit cheaper. They try to make it a mid-price radio. And oh, by the way, when this came out, this is $1,500 in today's money. Pretty expensive radio for back then. This still has the time chart, the booklet in here, but they quit doing the band spread shortwave bands, so that they have all these continuous shortwave bands on here. And so it's very hard to tune. They made this fine tuning knob so you could try and spread out the stations a little better, but so it does have some disadvantages. They put the CB band on here, but by then the CB fad was fading. They also put a VHF band on here for police, but nobody really wanted to tune in police this way. It was much easier to use a scanner to listen to different frequencies. So it was a bit obsolete when it came out. Sony made a radio, and it cost less than this one, and it had a digital dial, and it had a keypad input to put in the frequencies. So, and it also cost less, and it weighed 1/4 as much. So by then Zenith was getting pretty obsolete. This one was the last portable radio made in the United States, this model, not this particular one. They sent the parts over to Taiwan, and they made them for 2 years after that in Taiwan. And this one is the Taiwan radio. It was a little better built. The tuning mechanism was a little better.
And what bands did you say that was produced?
This one's about 1980. By 1981, Zenith could hardly give them away. They were discounting them, and you could buy them through the Heathkit catalog, and they got down to as low as $50 for these radios. So anyway, that's the history of, and the lineage of Zenith Transoceanic radios. Kind of gives an idea of the evolution of electronics as time went on, and kind of what happened to our electronics industry. Anyway, I hope you liked it.